We're snorting cap rates and shooting up cash flow here at Deal Junkies.
Welcome back, Deal Junkies.
That's not as enthusiastic as Gabe normally does, but
he's just welcoming the Deal Junkies back.
Trying to be coy. I forgot Gabe's last name, actually. Gabe Johansson is not here with us. I forgot his name, so I had to pause. With me, we got Dane McKinney, Trevor Howard. Special guest. I'm actually kind of nervous. I don't know why. Very good friend, Gabriel Hamel in the house. I love Gabriel, one of my most favorite people in the world.
Is he your favorite Gabe?
He's my favorite Gabe. I'm sorry, Johansson.
Yeah, let's go.
He's there. Yes, there's no doubt that he is my favorite Gabe. Sorry, I love you, Johansson, but Hamel takes the cake. So we're going to talk some stories today. We're not going to get a whole bunch into your background because you are a rock star. Everyone has heard of you, I'm sure. If you haven't, just Google his name. He's on like 800,000 podcasts. He has his own podcast, the 0 to 100 Tribe, which he's a part of. Definitely check out the 0 to 100 Tribe. They've got a book. They've got a community podcast to go along with it. I think my episode was like number 3, which is the best episode they've recorded yet.
Yeah, we're going to re-record with you. Yours is one of the very, very earliest. But now that we're up and running and quite professional-ish, we'll get you back on. We'll get all you guys on.
I love it. Okay. Quickly, for the people that don't know about Gabe, he is an absolute rock star. Got to R1, they call it, in 0 to 100 by making $1,500 of passive income per month. Quit his job. He was living off. He ate off free dishes that he found on the curb. He's one of those guys who kind of pushed off the instant gratification to do a whole bunch of deals to get cash flow. Always looked for cash flow. Never really wanted to be a flipper or developer. Bought a lot of single family homes. At the beginning, did everything seller financing because he didn't have any money. Started in the mid 2000s, made it through the crash, built a wider portfolio, became more and more involved. Then started leveraging that into doing a lot more things. Met you in 2019 at an airport randomly with the backpack on that matched mine. We've been best friends ever since. Okay, so that's the quick background.
You didn't know that you guys were both real estate investors? You just had matching backpacks?
So
connect over that?
We had both joined GoBundance.
Yeah.
And now GoBundance has grown to almost 1,000 guys. But at the time, there was like 4 of us in Oregon. And so I was going to my first event, and I see 3 guys walking together with the same backpack that GoBundance had sent me.
Gotcha.
And I'm like, hey guys, what are you in the same cult I just joined? And they happen to be guys from Oregon. And one of those guys were Mike Nuss here.
Yeah.
One of my other favorite parts about you, Guinness World Record holder, right?
Yeah, important to note.
I never officially, I've broken the Guinness record multiple times for diamond push-ups, but I never officially did get the record.
I saw it on YouTube one time. It looked insane. You're going so fast.
Yeah.
But I wanted to dive
What's the record?
Wait, before we dive into anything, there's a challenge. We're going to put an over-under on 2 specific words for Gabe today. Can you guess what the words are? I'll let Gabe guess.
Oh my gosh, I don't know.
Relational and seller carry.
Time and freedom. The over-under is 20 for each of those words. The over-under for the statement, time freedom, is 12. That's your challenge.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Place your bets now.
Yeah.
But yeah, what is the record? It's most push-ups in a minute, right?
It was the most diamond push-ups in the minute at the time. I think it was 83. I had multiple times gotten the mid 90 something, 93, 94, 95. The last time I looked it up, I think someone actually broke it by it was 100 and something in a minute.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you ever think about calling Guinness to get it official?
My official attempt got denied because of my form. I had a small dip in my back. I was trying to hit triple digits. I was trying to hit 100.
Okay.
Sacrificed my form and did not officially get it.
Gotcha.
That's what it was? It was a dip in your back?
A small dip in my back.
Well, I wanted to dive a little deeper into what Mike was talking about, the background, so we can lead into some of the other things. Because what's your portfolio size right now? Tell us where you're at right now.
Yeah, it's a mix of different asset classes within real estate. I have about a $60 million real estate portfolio. Within that portfolio, about 450 residential units between my multifamily and mobile home park units. But as of late, my last several purchases have been large industrial triple net type properties. So I have tenants that pay $500 a month, and I have a commercial tenant that pays, over $600,000 a year in rent. So it's a wide range, a wide tenant base. I still have some old single family homes. I've peeled most of those off, but some mobile home parks, multifamily, mixed use properties, triple net industrial, some other commercial. It's kind of a mix.
Yeah. So you've been buying over the last year then, because at the meetup you were around like 50 mil, I think, or so. So you've been
the last couple,
or it's worth more, I guess.
Yeah, kind of a mix of both. So I haven't purchased anything actually in 2024. So I've only had a couple years where I didn't purchase any real estate. That was 2008 and 2020. And then I went on kind of a rampage. 2021, I bought a lot. 2022, I bought a lot. And right now, I'm focused on not necessarily buying as many deals as possible, but more financially impactful deals. So I'm really shifting that to the commercial space and how to reallocate. Can I sell this property, or can I pull cash out of one of these properties I've held for a long time and use that equity to parlay into something that's going to spit off a lot more cash flow?
Mm-hmm.
So you're just looking at your return on equity on those?
Yeah, return on equity is not something I looked at for a long time.
Yeah.
It was always buy cash flow real estate. And it's interesting because I was always cash flow. I never looked at appreciation or upside. Not that I didn't know that wasn't eventually there. And it wasn't until years later, only a couple of years ago, I started looking at my return on equity. And I'm going, holy shit, I have a lot of equity, and this property's been a great cash flowing property for a lot of years, right? And as the years go on, rents go up a little bit, but look at this equity. Can I take that equity and put that into something that's going to give me a much higher return?
When you're looking at your return on equity, are you accounting for loan pay down, appreciation, depreciation, all that stuff? Or are you just looking at your cash flow return on equity?
I look at it, but I keep it pretty simple. I had a guy recently, I know Mike knows him, Jeremy Taylor, a mentor of his had said, and this isn't, an exact science, but a mentor said to him, and he shared it with a group of us, if you can get 10 years worth of cash flow in a day, you should consider selling. And I'm a pretty simple guy. So like I start looking at my portfolio and I'm like, shit, there's 10 years worth of cash flow. There's 10 years worth of cash flow. Then and so I really didn't look at return on equity for so many years because my focus is really buy and hold cash flow real estate. Just like I kept it to very simple fundamentals, like buy and hold cash flow real estate, get strong cash on cash returns or infinite returns, and build a cash flow portfolio. The reality is a lot of my wealth has actually been built in appreciation and the equity, right? So even though I've never invested for appreciation, and the cash flow has allowed me to hold the properties to a place where they appreciate or I can force appreciate them, that's where the wealth has really been built, is through that buy and hold cash flow real estate that over time does appreciate.
Yeah.
One thing we say a lot is stabilize, then maximize, and that's like at the project level. And then you get to the portfolio level, you have the portfolio building phase, and then you have the portfolio maximization phase. And while you're building that portfolio, if you're focused on cash flow, as a byproduct, you're focused on creating equity. Because really what you're doing is you're creating equity, whether it's over a long period of time, whether it's forced appreciation, a short period of time. The cash flow is a reflection of equity. And so the more cash flow you're getting, the more equity you are getting. And if you're building the entire time based on cash flow, then you get to this point where you can look at it and go, now it's time to maximize. We built the portfolio, and then now how do we maximize it? And then take advantage of the code to do that.
I would like to chime in that that's very true specific to Oregon. I don't know that that's true specific to other states. Just for people
Totally
listening.
agree with that.
So like Midwest, if you're looking for cash flow in the Midwest, you might not be building any equity, and you might be getting great cash flow. And so that's great. But because you have a bunch of properties that aren't in Oregon now, right?
I do. A lot of my commercial stuff. I have stuff in Indiana. I have stuff in Iowa, in Maryland. Where else do I have stuff?
In Maryland.
In Maryland, yeah, commercial property. So it's kind of a mix. But I do think those things, there's a relationship between equity and cash flow.
Yeah.
And especially, in the Pacific, certain markets more so than others. But one of those things, like I started buying in 2005, got more serious in 2009, and 2012 was the first time I ever went to like a real estate event. The first time I ever paid to go to an event. And it was the real estate guys, Summit at Sea. It was the first year that Robert Kiyosaki had gone on that trip, and all his advisors. And I think I'm big shit at the time. Like I have 17 units. I'm financially free, even though I'm like $1,500 a month cash flow positive. I'm like, you know, in my neighborhood with my friends, like 17 units. Most people haven't bought a house yet.
Yeah.
And I go there and, you know, I'm meeting people my age that have like 200 units. And I'm meeting people, you know, and this is 2012. So we're just coming out of like people that experienced 2008. And there was two things that happened at that event. For one, the speakers were great, right? There was a lot of great speakers, but I got around other people that were playing life big in the real estate world. And I learned a lot from them. But also just a mindset around like being able to do bigger deals. But what was interesting in 2012, I met a lot of people that got their ass completely kicked in 2008. Everyone that I met that got their ass kicked in 2008, some people lost a couple properties, some people lost thousands of units. They were all speculating. They were all buying only based on the upside, only based on appreciation, only based on forced equity, and not on the basic fundamentals of cash flow real estate. Everybody who held on to their real estate, including like Ken McElroy, were buying cash flow real estate. So yes, maybe the values went down on paper, but the rent stayed the same, or in some cases even went up. And they didn't care that prices went down because they weren't buying with the only exit. Like it had to go up in value. Rents had to go up. They were buying on basic fundamentals of real estate. And that kind of reaffirmed my belief of like buy cash flow real estate. But to Mike's point, yeah, the byproduct of buying and holding cash flow real estate over time, the appreciation will happen. That equity shows up. You have the principal pay down, you have rents go up. And then of course in the commercial space, you know, values are based on NOI. So you have commercial tenants that sign a long lease and there's 3% rent and, you know, rent bumps. By year 5, 6, 7, all of a sudden between principal pay down and rent increases, you've created a ton of value because those properties are based on NOI, unlike a single family home that's going to be based on comps or what someone is emotionally willing to pay for a property.
And that's one reason why I love the metric of return on equity. I do a decent amount of portfolio coaching. That's the one metric I want. What is your NOI? What's your equity? What's your return on equity? And then we can start making decisions. In my opinion, going back to the Midwest, is you actually want your return on equity to be going down. And if you're in an asset where your return on equity is not going down, you're not in a good asset for you because it's not going to take you forward as inflation continues to pop. It's not building the net worth portion, which is what real estate's really supposed to do for you.
So in 2008, when you saw those guys losing the properties, were they buying properties that didn't cash flow day one and didn't have a path to cash flow and they're just trying to bank on appreciation? Or was it they just had shorter term debt and they couldn't refi out? Or do you know what that looked like?
Yeah, a little bit. It was a mix of kind of all of it. So I had met, you know, at this event, there was a couple hundred people and this is 2012. So they're, you know, if they were impacted, they knew by now. A lot of it was speculative investments where it was either development projects or the only way the property penciled, it was short-term debt with the only way that property would pencil is if they got the returns that they were anticipating, that rents hit what they needed to hit, or the value of that property, it would appraise out to a point that they could refi. So it's kind of like, you know, they're buying a property that may or may not pencil, typically didn't today, in hopes, which we all know hope is not a strategy, in hopes that it will appraise out later under the assumption that rents will go up forever and prices will go up forever.
And were they raising money for all those deals too?
It was a mix, right? You had some people that, you know, maybe they own 3, 4, 5, 10 properties. It was their only properties. Other people were, yeah, absolutely. There was a lot of syndicators there that had raised capital and just could not refinance their properties.
Yeah. Is the difference what you saw Ken do is he just had long-term fixed rate debt so he could weather it?
Ken also keeps it really simple. He said, I had properties that cash flowed and I had long-term fixed debt.
Yeah.
And those properties continued to cash flow. And maybe there was a dip on paper.
Didn't matter.
I didn't have to sell them. I didn't have to refinance them. I held them and they still cash flow. And then you get to a place where it's like, okay, does it make sense to sell today or refi today? But, you know, the ones that made it through didn't put themselves in a position where they were forced to refi or sell just to make the deal work.
Yeah. For you personally too. So you started out doing like single family homes, all this creative stuff. You got your 17 units, you have that $1,500 cash flow. What made you change into commercial and what did those first commercial deals start looking like? Was it after this conference that you went to or?
No. So pretty much 2009 through 13, I bought a bunch of small multifamily properties. So my first 3 properties were single family. Then I went right into like small multifamily, a lot of stuff, old single family homes that were cut into 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, 10 units.
And is this all creatively? You're buying all this because you don't qualify?
Yeah, everything 09 through 13 was all no money down seller financing. Everything. The only criteria was they had to be cash flow positive. That was my only criteria. I didn't know all these metrics. I didn't know what fucking cap rate was. I didn't talking about return on equity. I didn't know what any of this stuff was. I'm like, my cash on, I knew what cash on cash return. I'm like, if I put no money down,
Infinite.
like I tried to calculate that. I'm like,
1 divided by 0. My calculator doesn't work.
yeah, I'm like, this is an infinite return, right? Or I would accidentally get money back at closing. I'd get like a deposit and prorated rent, and I'm like, oh shit, I bought this little property and I made $3,000 at closing. This is wild. Like,
when you say cash flow positive, how at that point in time, how well did you know how to analyze cash flow, and how certain were you that you were cash flow positive?
I felt pretty confident in that. Like all I would, these were all, not all, but most were off market deals. And I just didn't know I didn't know. So I would ask the sellers a lot of questions, but I'd always get 3 years of their tax, like the Schedule E. And so I'm running like really basic math. I'm like, I don't care what I think I could rent this for. These are all occupied properties. I'm like, this literally is what it's renting for. I wasn't like, I've never seen a performer that didn't look good. They all look good. They're like, oh, this is literally how well it performed if everything goes perfect and nothing goes wrong. Oh, no expenses, no vacancy, they rent 10% higher than what it was last year, even though that's not what the rent is today. So again, I just kept it simple. I wanted to know, what is the property doing today, and what has it historically done the last 3 years? So these sellers, I would just ask for copies of their tax returns, and I would base my numbers off their Schedule E. Here's the rents that have come in this year, last year, the year before. Here's what the actual rents are. Here's the actual expenses. And if I'm bringing no money down to the table, like I want it to cash flow. I just want it to be cash flow positive, and cash flow is going to flow one way or the other. I want positive cash flow. It didn't have to be a lot, but it needed to be a property that if I did nothing today, it would still perform how it's supposed to.
Oh, go ahead, Mike.
Well, I was going to say that's how we do all our seller financing as well. What's your net operating income? Try and get down to their net operating income and match that.
Were these distressed properties a lot of time? Because a lot of sellers don't want to give you 0 down seller financing and give you positive cash flow. So like, how were you getting yourself in that situation?
Yeah, they weren't super distressed, but they were poorly managed, under rented, some deferred maintenance. It was a lot of mom and pop sellers that were great people that were just tired. They're just tired landlords. They had self-managed for 30 years, good people that were just tired of being landlord, property manager, maintenance person. So it was kind of a mix of like, it's an okay tenant. They pay rent on time. It's not a big rehab project, but yeah, when that tenant moves out, there's going to be some cleanup to do, right?
Yeah, so it's less headache for them. They're making similar money to what they were on the front end, and you get to, were you hitting whatever price they wanted basically, or you beating them down on price and down payment?
I wanted a fair price, but I would take good terms over a good price any day.
Yeah. Okay, so you're doing that, and then you start buying this 2 to 4 unit cut up, messy stuff. Then how did you lead into like the parks and the industrial and all that?
Yeah, about I want to say around 2015, 16, something like that. I partnered with a guy. We started buying some properties together. We ended up buying some mixed use stuff together because we were both comfortable with residential. We had bought some stuff where it was commercial ground floor, residential, upstairs. And that just made sense. And I started seeing like, gosh, the rent these businesses are paying are obviously much higher than the residential. But I still, at the time, I think I had this self-limiting belief that commercial was risky. Like they're paying a lot of rent, and if they move out, that's gone. So even though I started buying some of this mixed-use stuff, both with the partnership and also on my own, there was usually a residential aspect to it. Like I bought this commercial building downtown Eugene, but it came with 7 multifamily properties, right? And so I kind of hedged the risk that way. And then around 2018. I was just looking at return, like where can I maximize my return? And, so many people were syndicating, so many people were in the multifamily space, and syndication just did not align with what I wanted to do, not just in my business, but in my life. I didn't want to raise a bunch of capital. I didn't want a bunch of partners. I didn't want a bunch of people to answer to or to ask me questions. I just wanted to do my own thing. I've only had a couple partnerships ever. But most of the stuff I own, and I can make the decisions and I get the upside.
Yeah. You're all about freedom in real estate. Like that's when we met you in Eugene for the first time. You're like, you were like, I want to go surfing, I want to go lift weights, hang out with my kids. Like, I know Dane walked away. I was like, I don't want to do any of that. I want to buy a bunch more real estate. And Dane's like, that's awesome. I want to live like just like Gabe.
Yeah, I was like, that dude's got it right. Because we had met with, I mean, when we met you the first time, Trevor and I were on a real spree of meeting with like
Everyone that
successful
owned
real
as much
estate
real estate as
investors
possible, yeah.
that were individuals. So like not syndications. Like we weren't trying to meet with private equity or like any family offices. It was just a bunch of dudes who owned like a bunch of multifamily, some mobile home parks, maybe like, you know, a variety, but for the most part, just like big multifamily owners that would sit down with us and be like, yeah, you know, 70% of my portfolio is just me. And most of the dudes that we sat down with, it was like, yeah, I'm single and like on my third, you know, I had 2 wives, but they just like our goals didn't align, and like they would go through it and they would act as though like they were stoked about where they were at, and I believe most of them, like I really do. But every time I left those meetings where they would be like, yeah, I have one daughter and like she lives in Ohio and we don't really talk anymore that much. Like sometimes she comes over and then they'd give me like what they did all day long, and they'd be like, yeah, I've just been, you know, all I really want to do is this, and it's, you know, maybe hurt some of my relationships. And that was the opposite of the reason that I wanted to get into real estate. Like it was my whole goal with real estate was time and freedom. And so I could spend the time where I wanted to, which wasn't on real estate. It was on life.
I love hearing you say that, because that was a big driving force for me as well. Was I had this innate desire to build wealth.
Mm-hmm.
Like it just felt very natural. Like I want to go out and build something. I want to be financially free. I want to build wealth in a way that also doesn't take away from my life.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a period of time, like, you know, I read the Rich Dad Poor Dad book, and then I read other books in the Rich Dad series, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be rich. I'm going to be wealthy. I'm going to, you know, create all this financial freedom and have all this money. But it wasn't until I really reflected on why. I'm like, why the hell does this seem so important to me?
Mm-hmm.
But I realized it did come down to time, and I wanted to own my life. I wanted to spend my life doing what I wanted to do with who I wanted, where I wanted. And so I really built my real estate portfolio under the premise of like, I'm building this so I can do amazing things in my life and have amazing connections and live my life on my terms. I'm not doing this to swim in a pile of money.
What's up, Deal Junkies? This is Trevor. I just wanted to let you know that we want to help you do deals. Because of that, we put a link in the description of this podcast episode where you can click it and book a call and talk to us. Go ahead and click that link and let's talk about some deals that you want to do or you are doing currently.
And, you know, I talk to a lot of real estate investors who say they get into real estate for financial freedom, and you dig one layer deeper, it almost always comes down to time freedom.
Yeah.
There's the very rare individuals. There's some guys, it's a very rare individual, man or woman, that they like love that 100-hour a week hustle, and that's fine. Like if that's their happy place, good for them. The other 98% of the people, they get into real estate investing, or their desire is one layer deeper than financial freedom. It's time freedom. They want to be able to spend time with their family. They want to be able to travel the world. They want to give back to some cause that's important to them, help their elderly parents, whatever their reason. And I watch way too many, not just real estate investors, but even in the real estate world, I watch way too many people get into real estate because they say they want financial freedom so they can have time freedom. And then they build something and create something that's completely far away from that. They've built a construction company and a management company,
Mm-hmm.
and they went from working a 40-hour a week, you know, W-2 job to working 100 hours a week hustling, and all the reasons they got into real estate in the first place, they're not aligned,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah. No, it makes total sense. And we see it. I mean, we have to be conscious of that too, where it's like our goal is to have fun building what we're building, but be aware of why we're building it. And it's super easy to forget that was the initial goal. Like the initial goal was to get all your time back. And it's not that we don't work the 100-hour weeks occasionally, or that we don't work like mostly 40 to 60. It's that we get to choose the 60. Like nobody's telling me when that 60 needs to be.
I think that's the big piece. Like you get to choose. Like time freedom for me, it's about freedom.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
yeah.
And so like if there's something I want to work on, I have the freedom to do it now or later or whenever the fuck I want to do it, versus someone saying, I need you to be here now. I need you to show up and do this now. Right. So it's about freedom, and it's about having more choices. Like I'm choosing to be here today, like with you guys. Like this is fun, right? Like I don't have to go take time off a job and not get paid to be here. Like I get to spend time with you. If I, I drove down 2 hours to watch my son play soccer last night. Like I wanted to do that. Right. And that's what it's about, is having more choices and designing your life the way you want, whether that means work on your business or whether that means go in the gym in the middle of the day or go travel somewhere awesome. And I think the thing that makes it easy to get there, maybe not easy to get there, but if people can shift their mind to just like the clarity of what they actually want in their life. Like so many people focus on like doing. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. They say yes to all these things and it doesn't align with what they actually want in life. And so I think clarity and alignment are huge things. And for me, what made it easy is there was only a couple things that were really important to me, right? Like my family is very important to me. And that means like, not just like emotionally important to me, like spending time with them, like being physically available, being in their lives, like my wife and my kids. So like my family, my health, building wealth in a way that doesn't take away from those things. And then I love traveling to really cool places with amazing people. And so there's only a few things that are really important to me, and either things align with that or they don't. If they align, it's easy to say yes. And if they don't align, it's easy to say no. And when you don't have that clarity, you end up saying yes to all this shit that doesn't align. And you end up spending your life doing all this shit that you really don't care about.
And to take that even a step further is time freedom doesn't come from financial freedom, or you don't need to be financially free in order to have time freedom. And then the other extension of that is what you do need to have in order to have time freedom is clarity and alignment. If you don't have that, you get into the trap where you can be extremely wealthy, tons of financial freedom, but because you lack the clarity and the vision, you have no time freedom. Time freedom is really your ability to control your time based on your desires, your goals, your directions, and what everyone around needs from you in life. And if you can manage your own schedule and your own time construct, you have time freedom.
Yeah, I think there's both extremes. You can be extremely poor and have time freedom.
Absolutely.
I knew a guy that literally, and I know one person that did this. He has since passed away, unrelated. He gave away everything he owned. And he would literally live off trade and lived fairly homeless. He moved himself to Hawaii, right? He had time freedom. It's either that or you build a shit ton of wealth.
Yeah.
So that you have the time freedom to go do cool things. And I'm pretty sure it was and I've used this quote before. I don't know why I keep quoting Coco Chanel, but I think it's a great quote. The best things in life are free, but everything else costs a lot of money, or something along those lines. And it's really true. Like there's a lot of really cool shit you can do that costs absolutely no money, and you can have that time freedom. A lot of the other really, really cool shit that there is to do costs a lot of money.
Yeah, you can't ignore the fact that you do need a minimum, like the Stanford study, the 70 grand a year, 100 grand a year, whatever it is. You do need to hit that to be able to have the anxiety taken out in life. Most people do. Most Americans were a consumer society. So having that lack of anxiety in your life because you have the income to offset it is a huge cheat code to time freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, it's like the stuff that I get the opportunity and choose to do today, I wasn't doing 20 years ago. Right. And so it's also like being aware of like where you are financially. Like, do I think it's stupid for someone making $50K a year to go take a $30,000 trip? Yeah, that sounds pretty stupid, right? But if someone's making $1 million a year and wants to take a $30,000 trip, sure. But there's people that make $1 million a year and will never allow themselves to go on some amazing trip either, right? And so it goes back to like, what is it that you want? Like, what are you building, and are you creating that in your life, and then actually taking advantage of those opportunities that are available to you? Yeah,
you can create wealth out of fear. A lot of people create wealth out of fear, or you can create wealth out of abundance, which is, I think, a lot of us really prefer to do. And it's interesting how the fear mindset shows up in creating wealth. I invest every penny so my bank account's empty, so that way I feel like I need to work hard. Which then gets into the conversation of content, complacement, comfort, which is a whole nother level, diving in deeper.
Have you had this level of alignment and clarity throughout your whole journey on what you were trying to do, or did you go through ebbs and flows of different goals?
Ebbs and flows for sure. And I'm continually, I always want to learn and grow, right? Like, my friend David Osborne said once, like a few years ago, if you're not slightly embarrassed by who you were 10 years ago, you're probably not growing. And that's really stuck with
That's
me,
awesome.
right? So I think about 10 years from now, who will I be? What will I look back on and be like, that guy said some stupid shit and did some stupid shit. Like, I don't know, but I also like to think today I have more clarity and more alignment than I did 10 years ago. And I don't think, I don't think we can ever be in perfect balance, right? I think it's always balancing, right? Like there's been times where I'm like, I need to go put more work in my relationship with my wife, like, or I need to go put more time in the business, right? And so it's always balancing and checking in with yourself, like because I don't want to just be, a rich, miserable guy. I want my relationships to be healthy, and I want my life to be rich, like fully rich too. And so, I haven't always had that level of clarity, but kind of to Mike's point about like scarcity and abundance too, like that was a big shift, right? I think a lot of investors, especially like a lot of the people in my circle, started with very little, including myself, like next to nothing. And then we've built. And so a lot of that, I think, starts out from scarcity. It's like, I don't have a lot, and you want to hold on to everything that you've created, everything that you've owned. And so it was really joining Abundance 2018 that I really started shifting my mindset to abundant. I was abundant in the sense of even before I had any kind of wealth or any real cash flow, I knew that I'd be successful. I knew I'd be financially free through real estate and build wealth. I didn't know what that was going to look like. And originally that came from a place of scarcity. I was holding on tight to everything that I made and earned and the wealth that I had. And it wasn't until I allowed my mind to really shift away from that and be abundant and start giving more and start allowing my mind to, or really allowing myself to do different things. Like I would hold on to something like, oh, that's expensive, versus like, that will enrich my life so much if I go do that experience. And so it's just a constant shift and check in with myself of like, where am I at? Where's my mindset? Am I being abundant? Am I, am I thinking in scarcity? Am I acting in scarcity? Am I acting in abundance?
Yeah. Have you at a point where you've let like finding deals, doing deals and all that consume your life, where you started forgetting about relationships and why you were actually doing it on the front end?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think full transparency, like in the early years, yes. Like I had only read books on investing in real estate. My now wife, in those early years, we separated when the kids were young. Like this was a big pivotal moment for me. Like the kids were about 3 and 5, 2 and 4, 3 and 5. And we got together young, we had kids quick. And like emotionally, I wasn't all in, right? Like my mindset back then was like, I like her, like, but I'm just getting to know her, but I'm not going to let someone get in the way of my dreams and my goals. And so for a lot of those early years, it was very much like me, like this is my dreams. And it was almost like I was emotionally not all in. Like, yeah, we may work out, we may not. We may be together, but we may not, right? And it wasn't actually until we separated and I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? I have this amazing woman. We have kids together. Like, what do I actually want in my life? And that was the first time that I really started focusing on any kind of personal development. Like what's the point? I had never read a book on, at the time, marriage or parenting or anything else outside of really real estate or business. And I'm like, wow, all my time. And it's not so much just like my physical time during the day, but like my brain would be on that. Like, we'd go on a date night and I'm like, I can't shut up about real estate. Right. And I think there's like an obsessive, like part of that I don't know. I don't know if you need, but like
It's helpful in some ways.
At a young age, but it's like, we would come back from a date night and like, I realized, or because she would tell me,
we just talked about deals for 2 hours.
Yeah, or not even, we talked about like, you talked at me. Yeah. And like, that's not what she wanted in a date night. Right. And so it's like, it's just a learning process. I actually wouldn't have our story any other way. Like there's a lot of things that I'm like, shit, I could have done this. I could have done that. But like our relationship today is amazing. And she's my best friend today. And we actually enjoy spending time together today. And I have no concern when the kids are grown and out of the house that we're going to enjoy each other. because we've put in the work, right? And it's outside of like, oh, we're not just together because of the kids, and this isn't just a transaction. Like, it's a choice of like, what did I actually want in my life? And it wasn't a bunch of real estate and no wife, right?
Yeah. So how long did it take you to realize that once you separated and that clicked? You like start thinking about it and then you're like, oh, I messed up? Or because you chose to leave at the beginning, I'm assuming, right? Kind of. And then,
Well, no, I mean, my go-to, like when we'd argue, to be like, get out of here. Like, I'm done. I'd say I'm done. That was my thing. I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm done. And then one day she's like, okay, well,
Me too.
I'm done. Yeah, me too.
Ugh.
Right? I'm like, oh shit. Okay. And,
I didn't think you were gonna call my bluff.
yeah, right. Like, she was done with it. She was done with it too. So like,
Yeah.
neither one of us thought that we would get back together. And I think, I spent a couple weeks feeling sorry for myself. Like, whatever. But then it was just, I had to really go deep and think about what's important to me and what's the point of, building a real estate portfolio. What's the point of, going all in on that if it's not the life that I want? But I think I learned pretty quick because I got clear on what was important to me.
so how'd you make sure not to go back to what you were doing previously? Because you just went back and got back together with her. Now you're staying with her. How did you not fall back into the same action?
Just clarity.
You knew after that.
Just clarity on what I wanted in my life.
This is a great segue. So, as you were kind of talking about building, I was going to ask you, or I wanted to ask you, at what point did the switch flip for you from building head down, not a lot of mindset, not really knowing what you're doing, to the point where now you got momentum, and then you kind of hit a tipping point. And then here's where I think this next question is going to really show how beautiful clarity and alignment is. When you went through this, because it sounds like a defining moment in just who you became as a human being.
Yeah, this is like a decade ago.
A decade ago. Yeah, right. So this is a decade in and a decade ago. How did that pivotal moment in your time show up in your business? We can understand the road you started going down, how it showed up with your relationships. And I do want to get in that, because you're someone who probably invests more into relationships than you do anything else. But I do want to know how that clarity and alignment of investing in relationships started showing up in your business.
It's a good question, and I don't know if I've ever actually been asked that specifically, and I like it because what's interesting, as soon as my focus went to everything outside of my business grew exponentially.
Yeah.
It was crazy, and it wasn't just my actions, it was like where my brain was. Like, I felt more at peace. I felt more well-rounded as a human. I felt like it wasn't so singularly focused of like real estate. It was like, how can I be an amazing dad? How can I be a better husband? Like, health is something that's always been important to me, but it was like all these aspects of my life enriched, including my business. When I stepped away from my only focus mentally being buy more real estate, my real estate portfolio grew.
Why do you think that was?
Well, quickly, this is why I think clarity and alignment bring you time freedom. Is because when you have clarity and alignment, you are present in the moment when you're in the things that you're doing. So you literally have freedom in the minutes that you're alive. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. I mean, I think being present is very challenging, but I also think being present allows you to not be anxious and not live in regret, because when I'm doing, say, this podcast, I want to be very present here with you guys, right? When I'm home with my family, I want to be present with them. I'm at the gym, I want to be present with what I'm, and I get distracted like anybody else, like, whatever. But I want to be present in whatever I'm doing. And for me, that brings a lot of happiness. Like, if you're not worried about all the what ifs that could happen in life, right? And you're not thinking about all the shit that you fucked up on that you could have done differently, then you're present.
Well, and that dovetails into one of the principal, spiritual components of real estate, being comfortable around money. It's more than that. It's just being comfortable in time. That's a byproduct of just being comfortable in the now and the present, the space you're in life, and not allowing those other anxieties and worries and regrets put excess emotions in your brain and excess chemicals that your body really doesn't need to feel.
Thinking about it now, that was probably why I was so not even I don't know the word for it, maybe enamored or just satisfied with our meeting when we first met down at Cheech's in Eugene was because I was at the point where I was kind of like trying to figure out what we were really doing. And then I met with you, and it wasn't even that I have all of the same goals as you. This is what it was. It was that if I was, 10 years down the road or wherever, however much older you are than me at the time, and I had the same.
We're probably the same age if you're 25.
and I had this, and I had the same demeanor that you had. Because you showed up and there was no goal. You were asking what you could do for us. Like, you weren't trying to get us to bring you anything, and you were just happy to be there. And then you said, hey, yeah, I was just hanging out with my kids, and then now I'm going to go work out. You guys do whatever. I'm going to find a deal later. And I left and I was like, he's doing all the deals. Like, there was obviously a way to do the thing that we wanted to do and also do everything else that I wanted to do in life and just be totally at peace. Like, there was nothing about you when I left where I was like, that dude seemed like he was like jittery. Like, there was nothing about it that was like he needed to be doing something else, or like he wanted to be somewhere else, or it like wasn't a good use of his time. And frankly, other Gabe is really good at the same thing, where like every single conversation that he has, he's clearly so present. Like, there's never a time where he seems anxious. It's the same feeling where like he's totally invested in whatever he's doing at that current moment. Like, he never seems like he doesn't want to be there. But anyways,
I've met a handful of people like that. They bring a grounding presence right from the get-go, because they are so present, because they are so grounded. It brings a calmness to the discussion immediately. There's so much power in that.
You know who can feel that too? Sellers. The owners of properties. So the moment that you're able to be present at home, it means that you're present in your business, and people can smell sales breath. People can smell it.
Well,
people
it
can
like
feel.
It's comes from a place of desperation, right?
Yeah.
And people feel that. And for me, it's about relationships. Like, I think life is about relationships, and that whether it's us having this conversation, friendship, the person you meet at the grocery store, like, it doesn't matter. Like, most people are interacting with people throughout the day in some capacity. And for me, there's no motive. Like, I don't need, like, when I meet someone, I literally don't care. Like, maybe that person's going to become my best friend. Maybe they'll be an acquaintance. Maybe we'll never see each other again. Maybe we'll do business together. But you can tell when someone meets you and all they want is your business, right? Or it's transactional. And so I don't look at real estate investing or my business any differently than I look at my entire life. Like, it's all life, right? Yeah. And so when I meet someone, it's like, they may end up being one of my best friends, and we may end up doing a deal together, and I may never see them again. Whatever happens happens, and that'll naturally just happen.
I got a question for you now. How does that show? Well, never mind.
Oh, now you're just making friends and having fun.
Now I'm curious.
Well, I was going to relate that to raising capital, but you're not a partner. You're not really a capital raiser. What I was going to say is, like, for me, it shows up. There's people where I don't even want to ask them for money. Does that make sense? Where I know based on who they are from a wealthy standpoint, what they need in their life, the projects that I have, there is a match there. But because we have such a defined foundation of why we know each other through a relationship, I don't want to get into the transactional side of talking about an investment. So I don't know that shows up in your life.
Well,
but is
no,
there
it has. So I don't raise capital in the sense of syndication, but I have borrowed money, private money from several folks, right? And I've also lent private money. And
I look at private money. Thank you.
You know what?
I actually live in the thing that you lend money on.
You know what? I didn't know I lent you guys private money until we had that lunch, and then we kind of connected the dots of how I lent you guys some money.
Yeah.
But I've been on both sides. Like, I've lent money out privately, usually to people I know, like, and trust, or we have some kind of mutual connection where it's both a trust and instinct thing too, right? And then the deal has to make sense as well. But I've also borrowed a lot of private money. But again, it's more relationship based than transactional. The first private money I ever borrowed was a seller finance deal where 6 years later I paid off that note. I refinanced. So my first couple seller finance deals that I did in 2009 and 10, I refinanced those in 2013 or in 2013, I think 2014. And when I paid off one of those sellers, she said, what am I going to do with all this money? And I said, you could lend it back to me. And at the time,
I have an idea.
and I said it kind of casually because at the time I had never borrowed private money and she'd never lent private money.
Yeah.
But what we had was 6 years of trust. And I used to hand deliver my mortgage payment to her. She had a brick and mortar business. I used to hand deliver that mortgage payment to her every single month just to have that FaceTime, build that relationship, right? And so like I am thankful to her because for one, she was the first person to carry financing for me. And then when I paid her off, we had 6 years of trust. She knew that I made my payments on time every single month. So she called me back a couple months later. I was in contract on a deal that I was going to go get hard money loan on. And she said, hey, were you serious about me lending you money? And I said, yeah, I'm actually in contract on a deal in the same neighborhood, literally like across the street from one of the properties I'd bought from her previously. She's like, I'll lend you the money. And I've had multiple private money lenders and it's all came from organic relationships. Like people are too transactional about it. Mm-hmm. And so I've borrowed private money from, a handful of people and it's all been way more relationship focused. And a lot of that, all of it now is unsecured private money, right? And so it's not about the asset. It's not about the property. It's that they trust me and I'm someone that keeps my word and makes my payment and pay them off when I say I'm going to. And that's the relationship piece. And I think in real estate specifically, people focus so much on the transactional piece. The transactional part of real estate is the easy part. It's the relationship piece that people have a hard time with. And it's kind of sad that's a rarity these days that people focus on the relationship over the transaction.
Yep. Absolutely.
Going back to the deals you were buying. So when you were...
Oh, yeah. You asked me about how I
that's how we
shifted
got
into
here.
mobile home parks and then an hour hour later, here we are.
Yeah. So I was curious on those first like mixed use buildings because you're not cash flowing a ton at that point. Like, are you doing zero down seller finance still on those once you're going in the commercial space, or are you using commercial loans, or how are you going about that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So that we're getting back to now. So a couple of those mixed use buildings, it was interesting. I had bought a property downtown Springfield, Oregon with a partner. And it was residential upstairs. It was like 13 residential units and ground floor commercial. But was able to negotiate phenomenal deal. We ended up borrowing hard money on that and some renovation money. But the residential, because both of us were so concerned at the time, like so fearful of commercial, the property penciled with very, very conservative rents just on the residential side. Now, obviously the commercial space is like icing on the cake and how that property really, really profits. But that's just how we mitigated our risk at the time, right? And then we bought another, similar setup building where it was mostly residential, but there was some commercial space. And so it was almost like we were pretty much underwriting it with the commercial as if it was vacant. And we're like, if this pencils, we're gonna be okay. And then around 2018, I was just looking for where can I find return, and I felt like cap rates were being condensed to nothing in the multifamily space. I just felt like a lot of people were raising capital on slim margins. And so I started looking at the mobile home park space, and a lot of these mobile home parks, poorly managed, under rented, kind of fit a very similar criteria to the stuff I was buying in 2009 and 10, 11. But I liked that space because I felt like there was a value add component that wasn't costly. So I bought my first park in 2019. So I own 8 mobile home parks and 1 RV park now. And so my first mobile home park, it fit that criteria of under rented, poorly managed. There was a small apartment on the property as well. So there was some deferred maintenance on that. But when I bought that property, I bought it for $1.3 million, and that property rents hadn't been increased in 4.5 years and utilities weren't being billed back. And so just doing basic numbers, it worked. It worked when I bought it. I actually used hard money. Actually, remind me to go back. Like I sold a single family home 1031 into this, and then I actually pulled cash out of this first mobile home park and bought my first industrial deal, which is my highest cash flowing deal, right? And so I kind of parlayed that. So
yeah, we can dive into that.
Yeah, remind me to go back to that.
The equity stacking play. We'll pull it up. Equity stacking play.
So that first park, my property manager sent out a rent increase because they hadn't been increased in 4.5 years, and it was still below market rent. And then 6 months later, build back utilities. So it's still affordable for them. But that added $30,000 to the NOI without spending a dollar.
And you buy on hard money and we're cash flowing day one.
Hard money, cash flowing day one. That park, I paid $1.3 million. It appraised out at $2.775 million 2 years later.
Mm-hmm.
I actually had refinanced my first 4 mobile home parks a couple of years later, pulled out cash, and then redeployed that into other deals. So I went from hard money to long-term debt, pulled out tax-free cash, and then redeployed that money into more profitable.
Yeah. Where were you buying these parks at?
So I have the 8 in the RV park. They're all my mobile home parks are in Oregon, except for I have one in Idaho.
Okay. Do you feel like, because that seems insane to me, go buy something on hard money, highly leveraged, and it cash flows. Like, that's pretty unheard of right now, I feel like.
Yeah, that's pretty unheard of.
So
yeah,
do you feel like you could go repeat that right now? Or like, how were you going about that then? And could someone go do the same?
Yeah, I think the mobile home park space, just like every asset class, has been very frothy. I think, you had guys like Brandon Turner on Bigger Pockets talking about mobile home parks, and everyone wanted to buy mobile home parks. And so I started seeing the mobile home park space get a lot more competitive. But even in 2019, 2020, 2021, there were a lot of undervalued parks. There were a lot of parks where rents just hadn't been increased in a long time. They were just being really poorly managed. They weren't billing back utilities, all these little things. And so I still saw an opportunity. I do think there's still opportunity, but I think, like any asset class, deals are made, not found.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, can you find that park, or does it have to be a mobile home park? Can you find that property where there's some kind of inexpensive value add component to it? So for these early mobile home parks, that value add was like, our rent's way below market rent. Are there other parks in the area that's renting for more? Can I build back utilities without, putting too much cost on the tenant where it's unaffordable, or they're going to move out? Or a lot of these parks, they would have a couple park-owned homes, but all the maintenance and repair would be on those park-owned homes. Can I sell those to the tenants, convert those to tenant-owned homes, and take a lot of the expense off of the owner's plate? So just little things like that aren't costly moves, but can increase the NOI significantly and add a ton of value. Because again, the NOI, or the value, is based on the NOI of that property.
Just when you switched to mobile home parks, or decided you were going to buy your first mobile home park, what was was there any change in your due diligence checklist? Just because there's always a fear of not a fear, but it's, hey, I've done really well with multifamily. I understand it inside and out. It takes me 10 minutes to value a property, like pretty on point.
Yeah.
But then you switch to mobile home parks, and you might even feel the same way, that it takes you like 30 minutes instead of 10. But in the back of my mind, or in the back of your mind, you had to be thinking like, maybe I'm missing something. Like maybe what was the change?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I did experience, those things, but it's also like, people buy every type of asset class. So it's not like I'm making up something new, right?
Sure.
And so because I didn't know what I didn't know, what I originally did, I went on LoopNet, because I didn't know, and I don't think LoopNet's necessarily a great place to buy properties, although I have
There's
purchased
deals.
There are deals.
Yeah.
I went on there because I didn't know if I was going to be buying in Oregon or other parts of the country. I ended up buying most of my parks in Oregon because I do know that market, and I can make a good decision. But I went and pulled up every single mobile home park listing, every single one of them.
Yeah.
And most of them have the financials available. So I started looking at the P&Ls. And yeah, there's more line items, right? There's more line items. So it's like, oh, what's that? Oh, what's that? But you look at, 50 of them, and you figure it out. Oh, this one has city utilities. Oh, this one, it has like almost no charge for water because it's on well, right? Mm-hmm. So there's more line items, but you're analyzing it
Still just
about the same.
Gives you more insight into the property. Those line items do.
Yeah.
I guess part of it too is like there's things that you don't even know that could be wrong with it, was part of where I was getting at, like with a septic tank on a mobile home park versus on an apartment complex. You're typically not seeing septic tanks.
Yeah, I've had shit go wrong, and I definitely could have and should have done more due diligence on a couple of these parks for sure.
Sure.
That being said, I think there's value in taking action. Like, I bought those 8 parks, and at the 9th, the RV park, and most of them are kicking ass. I'm having one major issue with one of the parks in Idaho. It is a septic issue, right? Like, it's my smallest park, but on the most land.
Yeah.
But you can always find a reason not to buy a property, and those first 4 mobile home parks, and then the next 4, like, those are life-changing purchases, right? Like, those have added so much, cash flow to my life and given me more opportunities because there was an opportunity to force equity in those, and then go use that to buy other large commercial deals, that there's something to be said about actually just taking action. You can find it's the same thing in 2009 when I started buying these small multifamily. People are like, you're crazy. What if this happens? What if this happens? What if this happens? I'm like, what if it all goes right?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what if I don't buy this property? Like, what am I going to go back to a minimum wage job? Like,
Yeah.
you know,
What's my downside there?
yeah. So I look at like, there's going to be risk to any deal, but I look at what's the upside and are there ways to mitigate that risk? And usually there are.
Yeah. No, that's what I was hoping to hear, was exactly kind of how we view multifamily, at least, which is where it's like, yeah, there's a ton of variables and I can look at most of them. Like and there's always going to be something that's unknown, but my downside of not doing these deals seems worse to me.
And just owning more real estate is actually less risky than owning less real estate, because shit will happen in real estate. Like things will come up, but the more real estate you own,
the less it matters when one thing goes wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. 100%.
And guess what? Something's going to happen to the thing you already own.
Sure.
And then you're going to buy this project and it's going to help pay for that one.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100% of real estate comes from assumptions, not knowing 100% on multiple variables.
That being said, though, I am always in a better position because I own real estate than if I didn't own real estate. There's always a lever to pull because I own real estate, where if I didn't own real estate, or I only owned that one property where there was a oh shit moment, I wouldn't be in the position I am now because of the other real estate. You have other levers to pull and go, I could sell this, I could refinance this, I could do that, right? Like,
this is a good conversation segue into the stacking equity. I want to go to 2 points. You make deals and fundamentals. We've talked about making deals a lot, and then fundamentals. Forced appreciation comes from making a deal based on fundamentals matching the right property that then has the levers you can change to force the appreciation. Or you make deals that don't have forced appreciation based on the fundamentals that you structure over a long period of time, so then you can build wealth that way. But if you find those properties that are undermanaged, that have little levers you can pull, like everything that you've just said, and now you go make a deal based on the fundamentals that they have in place, and then pull those levers, that's where forced equity comes from. And then you take that forced equity, and that becomes the double-edged sword in life. So I don't know if we want to get into the equity stacking now. That's
all right. No, we'll dive into that next episode. So when did you start going out of state? Because you're still buying all your stuff in state at this point. Did mobile home parks cap rates compress, and that's when you got into industrial and started going out of state? Or
first time I went out of state, I bought a little $50,000 house in Pennsylvania. I kind of forget about that. Bought that for cash. It cash flowed. I'm like, there's no appreciation in this market. I think I sold it for like 25 grand more. That 50 grand included like a full renovation of the property and stuff too. Fucking wild. I don't even remember what year that was. It was really random. Met this guy at a conference.
I was gonna say, why'd you do that?
I don't know. Met this guy.
That was before the clarity and alignment came into life.
Met this guy at a conference, and I'm like, oh, I have 50K. Like, that's a good cash on cash. And then I'm like,
what am I doing?
And it was a fine property. Like, it cash flowed, made money, but it wasn't going to be.
It's just a lot of work for a little amount of small deal size.
I didn't have to do any work. But
really?
Yeah, I didn't do the renovation.
Well,
no.
It sounds like a pretty good deal then. You made 25 grand.
Yeah, it was a good deal.
Yeah.
But it was like, I just had this little single family home in somewhere in Pennsylvania.
It wasn't impactful.
Wasn't impactful.
You couldn't scale it either.
Couldn't scale it.
You couldn't do that 100 more times easily at least.
Yeah, right. And so, but first time going out of state. Let's see. Aside from that, so I was buying most of my mobile home parks in Oregon. I bought one in Idaho, and then my first real out of state deal was 140,000 square feet in outside of Fort Wayne, Indiana. 5 triple net commercial properties. The down payment on that came from the cash out refi of that first mobile home park that I purchased. And it went back to, like, some people specialize in an asset class, and I think that's fine. Like, that's great for some people, especially if you're raising capital. Like, if someone's taking someone's money to invest, you want them to be an expert in that asset class. When you're investing for yourself, you do whatever the hell you want that makes hopefully it makes good financial sense. So for me, it was about looking at return. Like, how can I scale in a way without bringing on partners or a ton of partners? And so, yeah, my first big out-of-state deal was 5 properties in outside of Fort Wayne, Indiana, commercial property, strong tenant. And really when I bought that property, there was 2 years left on the lease. I wasn't comfortable with 2 years left on the lease. I didn't want to end up with 140,000 square feet of empty industrial in
Yeah.
Indiana. So, with commercial in particular, it's how strong is the tenant and how strong are the leases. And I felt comfortable with the location. I felt comfortable with the tenant, but not with the 2-year lease. So I wanted to negotiate a longer lease. I was able to get a 7-year lease with rent increases, and they've been a great tenant. That was partially bank financed and then partly seller financed.
You told me who this tenant was when we actually I think at the last meetup. But can you share who it is? Does it matter?
Yeah, I mean that tenant they do interior manufacturing for RVs.
Mhm.
So the Fort Wayne, it's Ascot International. So they have a lot of the big contracts with the RV manufacturers. They're a phenomenal tenant, and so that area is kind of a hub for the RV manufacturing space. Strong tenant, 5 locations. They want to be there for as long as I'll have them there, and I don't want empty industrial space.
Yeah.
So, they've been a strong tenant. And then I have a 2-tenant commercial property in Iowa City. That was a very creative financing deal and probably one of my favorite properties to share about. I think I've shared about it with you, Mike, because
It's my favorite one.
It's a stellar deal.
it's an awesome deal.
Do you want to? Can we talk about that in the
Let's
next
do that
one?
in the deal
Well,
episode.
yeah, I want to dive into so when you structured this deal with bank financing and seller carry, what did that look like?
So the bank was willing to carry 80% of the loan, and then we had a second a 10%.
All right, so you only had to bring 10% down.
I brought 10% down, and that 10% down was really phantom
came
money.
from your
It was
other deal.
Well, it came from my single family home that I put no money down on.
Yeah.
I sold that single family home, used that money to put down on the mobile home park, which I think was around 10%, maybe a little bit more on the mobile home park. And then that mobile home park is the park that I bought for 1.3 that appraised at 2.775. I went from a hard money loan to a long-term, literally interest rate cut in half, pulled the cash out, and then used that cash as the down payment on that industrial deal.
Was the bank cool with that? Because a lot of the times when we're dealing with banks, they'll let you do stuff like that if it DSCRs, but they just didn't care because it DSCR'd.
On this deal, yes, that was disclosed to the bank because I do think that's an important piece, and people have gotten in trouble for not disclosing things to the bank.
Oh, if you go put a second, you can get your loan called.
So it is a recorded second on that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so
sweet.
how much does 140,000 square feet of industrial space cost? Because that's a massive size couple buildings.
I paid $8 million for it.
Yeah. So was that scary? Because that was your biggest purchase to that date.
Correct.
Was that because you're going in new market,
You
new
paid
asset class?
50,
60
60 bucks a foot? 60 bucks a square foot?
Something like that. I don't know.
How much does it cost to build it?
It's a good question.
I know it's not but still.
I mean, in Oregon, way more than that, but yeah.
I mean, it depends on the build.
Yeah, sure.
Like industrial costs substantially
Less,
than,
yeah.
But yeah, how did you feel going into that? Because that's new asset class, new market,
Fundamentals,
biggest
man.
deal
What do you
size.
do? What do you
But
care
still,
about?
you're still
it is the fundamentals. I mean, the property cash flow is about 150 grand a year, right? And so for me, the biggest sticking point was that 2 years on the lease. I felt very comfortable with the tenant and the tenant's financials, and I felt comfortable with the lease outside of just there being 2 years left on the
So
lease.
let's talk about that part of it. Does that comfort come because of what it does for you in the vacuum of that deal? Obviously, time, we want that, creates levers that create value in your life. At the same time, though, what does that extra 5 years do for you from a portfolio building standpoint to help mitigate the risk that you're concerned about? Does that come into your mind at all? Does that make sense?
The risk of
That deal, right? So you're like, I don't like the tenant at 2 years. So then that risk in the vacuum, that level of risk, really what you're saying puts everything else at risk. Does that make sense? Or brings a layer of risk
sure,
to you?
yeah, because if the tenant vacated, then that's a big expense that
Correct.
I have. And so what actually happened is the bank. So the tenant originally said, "Well, we're not really going to probably talk about renewing the lease. Why would we until we're about 6 months out?" Well, then the bank said, "Well, we don't like that. There's only 2 years
Right.
left on the lease." And I'm like, "This is perfect." The
Yeah.
bank doesn't
Listen to these guys.
because at that point on that size deal, the bank's going to underwrite it pretty
Yeah.
heavily too. Who's the tenant? What do the leases look like? So the bank, and up to that point, I was like, I don't use banks. I only use banks for refis. Right? But now I have the bank doing some of that work. And what I liked about it is it actually coincided with my same concern
Mm-hmm.
was like, oh, there's only 2 years left on the lease. And then the bank said there's only 2 years left on the lease. And for us to feel comfortable doing it, we need a longer lease. So then the broker could go back to the seller and say, hey, like, we all like the deal, but this is the one sticking point.
Yeah. Bring your lenders and appraisers in as teammates. I'm doing that right now in the care facility. What I wanted to get at, what I'm trying to point at, though, is we think of context of risk in a vacuum. And we do what we want to do to reduce and mitigate it in that vacuum. But as you're talking, and my mind's going, there is significant more value when you reduce the risk in that vacuum by extending time, because of the more time it gives to you and your entire portfolio and your entire life to now create extra layers of risk mitigation above and beyond that vacuum. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I think there's risk to any deal, but that being such a like financially impactful deal, like, you know, I'm looking at that going, it's not my highest cash on cash return.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But the cash I put into that came from like make believe money.
Yeah.
Like, I think money is made up. Like, money isn't real.
It is made up.
It's
yeah.
not real, like, at all. Right. And so it was more about, was there a level of like, oh, this feels a little uncomfortable? Sure. But I'm okay being a little uncomfortable. And even though the cash on cash return was less, the financial impact of that deal was much more.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same way I'm looking at return on equity in some of my smaller properties. I'm like, this single family home that I bought 10 years ago with no money down, infinite cash on cash return. But there's $300,000 in equity.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Could I go buy a $3 million property with that? And even if that $3 million property is giving me a 10% cash on cash return, the net cash that I'm getting, the net cash flow that I'm getting is much higher than that single family home that's inched up in rent slowly over, you know, the last couple of years.
It's a higher gross dollar amount,
Yep.
which is why net return on equity is so much better.
Yep.
So much better.
So after you did that industrial property, you started doing more industrial properties after that?
Yeah, I bought a deal in Iowa City, and I love sharing this deal because I think up to this point, or even up to the Indiana property, I always looked at creative financing as basically seller financing. Almost really everything I'd purchased up until 2022 was all seller financing, and then some hard money and private money, or a combination of those things. And up until that private money deal, it was all seller financing, right? And so I was like, seller financing, hard money, private money. Banks don't get creative. They're very like in a box, black and white. And I would badmouth banks, and I'm like, it's so much. And I still believe it's easier to buy a property, seller financing, and then refi into long-term debt, right? Like when I refinanced all those properties in 2014, I already owned the asset, and they all appraised out 70% LTV or better. I just had to refi into better debt. I wouldn't have been able to purchase those then. I would have had to come in with 30% down on every one of those. Mm-hmm. At the time, I didn't have that money, right? So I got distracted. ADD here. Iowa City. So a broker that I had worked with on the Indiana deal, who was no longer with that company, we had stayed in contact, and she had brought me some deals. I had talked to her saying, hey, I want to buy some more commercial properties. And she was sending me everything from like medical, the strip malls, to industrial. And I was open to other asset classes within triple net, but I really liked industrial. Like when I started analyzing these deals, these are like big businesses in here, like, and they're doing a lot of revenue, right? And one of the questions I first had to myself was like, even with this Indiana deal, is like, if they're making so much money, why wouldn't they want to own the real estate, right? And I started doing a little bit of research on that, and what I found is like, and it makes sense. Like to us, we want to own real estate. We want real estate on our balance sheet, and we're okay with having debt on our balance sheet, especially if it's cash flow in real estate. Mm-hmm. But a lot of these businesses, they don't want that real estate debt on their balance sheet. No, they want to go put their money, time, energy into whatever the hell they're producing, and that is the best return on their time, energy, and money, right? So the second deal I did in Iowa City was a 2-tenanted property. One tenant is the largest labeling packaging manufacturer in the world, and the other tenant is the oldest commercial construction company in Iowa City. And I kind of thought the same thing, like, why wouldn't they want to own the real estate? Well, the real estate, the property was actually built by the commercial construction company in the mid-90s. And now they want to recapitalize. Now they have this valuable property, but again, their better use of time, energy, and money is to go run their business. What was unique about this property, and it's kind of both, I think a good story on creative financing, but also on relationships. So the broker had a good relationship with a bank that liked this area, liked the asset class. And so not only was I able to leverage my relationship with the broker was able to leverage her relationship with the bank. Well, the bank liked the deal. They liked the area. I think they had done several other loans for this broker or their clients, and they liked my balance sheet and kind of my story. Well, this particular deal, and I can go into the details of it.
Yeah.
I bought it for $2.9 million. And what made it unique is one of the tenants had just signed a 5-year, the tenant that was a seller leaseback. The tenant that that built the property in the mid 90s, they were the ones selling. They locked themselves into a 5-year lease slightly below market rent and no rent increases. The other tenant was the largest labeling packaging manufacturer in the world. They're in I think 300 locations across the U.S., but their number one client is Procter & Gamble, which is like a mile and a half from this property. Well, after they signed their initial 10-year lease, they only did 1-year lease increments. And I was like, there's some risk to that. So they had just finished their 10-year lease, and corporate only let them do 1-year lease increments. And because of that, I was able to negotiate a $350,000 rent guarantee at closing. And that rent guarantee essentially stated that if that tenant vacated, that rent guarantee would cover the rent. Or if I ever signed a new lease with a tenant, or if I ever got the tenant to sign a 5-year lease, that would be released back to me. But here's what actually happened. I bought this for the $2.9 million. The bank carried 80% and the broker carried 10%. So this is an 80% loan from the bank, 10% from the broker, and I was supposed to bring in the other 10%.
How'd they do 10%? They had a 10% fee scheduled that they carried?
They brought it in as down payment assistance.
They literally invested money in your deal.
They brought it in as down payment assistance. They had the property in contract, so they probably made a spread on that anyway, like basically acting as like a wholesaler.
Okay.
But the reason the bank was willing to do that with the high leverage is because the property cash flowed well. It was actually 60% cash on cash first year. It was on track to do 72% cash on cash year 2, except for it got better, and it's actually an infinite return, which we'll get to. So I buy it for 2.9. I bring in $300,000. That there was that $350,000 rent guarantee, and the lender said, we don't need that escrowed and we don't need all of it. We're going to give you $150K back at closing. So let's go through those numbers again. I pay $2.9 million. I bring in $300,000, so 10%, and they hand me a check back for $150. So I'm in this prop.
But you still have $200 in an escrow account.
Oh, it never went to an escrow account. I tell you, it gets better. So I'm in this deal 5% down. Okay, this property cash flows year 1 like $90,000. So $90,000. That's 60% cash on cash return. But yes, Mike, there is $200,000 left over, and the lender said, we don't need to escrow that either. We want deposits at our bank.
Yeah, open an account.
You can put it in a savings, a checkings, or if you want to put it in a CD, you can.
Collected interest.
So I collected interest on that $200,000, and they said, we'll release that to you. We'll release that to you if they sign a 5-year lease. We will release that to you. If they vacate, it'll cover the rent. That'll go to cover the rent until you sign a 5-year lease. And when you sign a 5-year lease, they'll release it back. So about a year in, they were about to sign another 1-year lease because corporate only lets them sign 1-year leases.
Yeah.
And I asked the lender, I'm like, look, this tenant's a great tenant. Their number one client is close by. They will not sign another 5-year lease. Is there any way that I can get that release back? And they said, you know what, if they sign another year lease, which they want to be there forever, then, we'll talk about releasing it. Well, that tenant was like, Procter & Gamble wants us in their building, but we don't want to be there. We actually like this location. Can we sign a 2-year lease? And I'm thinking, okay. So
Sure.
They sign a 2-year lease with a rent increase. So now it's about to be a 72% cash on cash, which is looking good. And I contact the bank, and I contact them. I actually sent them the addendum to the lease with the increase in the 2 years, and they released that $200K back to me after a year and a half of me earning interest on it.
So you got paid $50,000 to buy the
I got
deal.
paid $50,000 to buy the property, infinite return.
And the broker had the deal before you. That's the best part.
Yeah, everybody won.
Yeah.
That's the thing. I think.
But you
I think
won the most.
I think I won the most. I do think,
No, the seller is going to go put that money to work. I do.
I still think
there's-
I won the most. I mean,
I think here's how you won the most. Here's what I don't get about that rent guarantee. They're guaranteeing the rent. So if the rent comes in, shouldn't that go back to the seller?
it was something that we negotiated
You wrote it really,
For-
really well.
for me. The broker wrote it very well, but
Yeah.
but that was the intention, because it was like, you know, kind of going back to like that first industrial deal where it's like, hey, I like the deal, I like the tenant, I like the property, I'm good with everything except for that 2-year lease. It was similar in this. I'm like, I like the property, I like the numbers. The numbers are
Yeah.
great, but if that tenant leaves, that's the risk. How do I mitigate that risk?
But you did it in a way that it wasn't an escrow holdback. It wasn't just holding their funds. It was
normally-
a 10% cut to their net.
Normally that would be escrowed,
Yeah.
but the bank, and that's where like I'm like, wow, the bank.
But it would be escrowed and it would be their money, right? It's escrowed based on performance.
in a typical case, if there's a typical case, I would think that the money would be escrowed,
Yeah.
and then if that tenant vacated,
Yeah.
it would spit off to
To me.
me, to cover that rent.
And
But
if it
once they
didn't, it would go back.
Yeah.
to the
If
seller.
once they signed a lease, it would go back to the seller.
Yeah, but the bank, that's not how it was written. And
Yeah.
what the bank.
I'm not complaining.
I'm not complaining. The reason the bank was willing to do that, for one, the deal was good on its own.
Yeah.
The deal was fine, and so they were fine with the leverage, and I was fine with the leverage because the cash flow supported the deal, and then the bank wanted deposits. So the bank's looking at it from the perspective of like, why would we? First of all, they were like, that was the bank that said we don't need the whole 350. Sounds good. Sounds
Yeah.
good. So they give me that 150K back at closing, but they're like, we want deposits. So like, why wouldn't I say yes to that?
Yep.
And really thinking about it, why wouldn't the bank do that?
Yeah.
Why would the bank
What
want that
incentive do they
escrow?
have
if-
to just sit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm
Well,
try-
probably deposit looks different on their books. Yeah. I do want to say this. One thing is you started evolving into this where my mind went was impact, right? So your impact can be created. I love the statement. So you become a millionaire by owning real estate. You become a billionaire by owning businesses. Millionaires have people as their tenants, right? You get into these bigger commercial buildings. Now you have billionaires as your tenants. And so it brings on a different level of safety. It brings on a significantly different level of impact if you look at it from that lens, because that company, your tenant who's paying your rent, provides a significant bigger impact to the world. So if you look at your assets based on that, if your assets are creating impact, you as an owner of those can create. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, it's wild to me, like kind of going back, like we look at real estate as an asset,
Mhm.
and they look at their business as an asset.
Yep.
They're both assets, but it did throw me a little bit through a loop when I'm like, why would they pay $620,000 a year in rent when they could own the property?
Mm-hmm.
But they're not building wealth through owning real estate. We're building wealth through owning real estate.
Yeah.
They're building wealth through creating a business. But, you know, business owners, like legitimate, strong businesses, are great tenants.
Yeah.
They're easy. There's, you know, I talk about mobile home parks having all these line items. Like my commercial properties, like especially like that Indiana deal, there are no really line. It's like I look at my bank and it's the rent, and it's the mortgage, and it's the rent and the mortgage, and the rent and the mortgage, right? And I think doing bigger deals, you could start off doing bigger deals, but I think there's a sense of, you know, the smaller deals gives you the confidence and experience to then do the next deal, right?
Mhm.
Like that first seller finance deal gave me the confidence and experience to do the next one. The first mobile home park deal gave me the confidence and experience to the next one, the next one, the next one. And same thing in commercial. Like it should be slightly uncomfortable. Like if you're growing, it should be a little bit uncomfortable, or have that little bit of nervous feeling of like, oh shit, is there something I'm missing, something I don't know? But at the end of the day, buy some fucking real estate.
Yeah. I want to jump backwards a little bit. So that 10% that the broker was carrying, I'm trying to understand that still. So she had to be wholesaling it to you rather than brokering it, or both,
Both.
correct? So she was under contract or whatever, 2.5, selling it to you at like 2.9, and that's where she created the 10% she could then carry. Is
Correct.
that-
Correct.
Okay. And the bank knew that the whole
Correct.
time. Was cool. Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So she's essentially like a novation, right? Similar to that.
I mean, again, it's a win for her.
Yeah.
For me, it's a win for the bank.
They didn't care
She
because
also-
financial
She
support.
could have had a 6% fee in there.
Also, yes.
Yeah, so it's like
Well, yeah, and then only
she
carried
could have had a
4%.
margin of
Okay, and then is that off-market deals you were doing with that broker, or how'd you?
They mostly source off-market deals, but I think they probably source on-market deals too. This one was off-market, yeah.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, I just wanted to end with one more thing because before we jump into more deal stuff in the next episode, could you give a background? Because I think it's really interesting to share. Like, this is really cool, all this stuff you built, but you started out working minimum wage, and what were you doing again at the beginning? You were a teacher?
Well,
or?
no, I wasn't quite a teacher. I was working as a teacher's assistant in a high school, like special education class for kids with severe disabilities.
Yeah, and you had no idea about real estate when you were starting out at all.
No, I knew about real estate. So like if we're backing up, I read Rich Dad Poor Dad in 2002,
Mm-hmm.
and then I get deployed to Iraq in 2003. So I'm living in my friend's attic for $100 a month in 2002. I read Rich Dad Poor Dad. I'm fired up. I'm like, I'm going to buy real estate. I'm building this real estate empire. Then I get a phone call and I'm deployed 5 days later. So I had the excitement, and then I'm deployed 03 and 04. And then I come back in 04 and I start looking at properties. Buy my first house in 2005. 2006, I buy my second place. I open up a small nutrition store that most months only made a couple $100 a month. 2007, I buy another place. So 5, 6, 7 bought properties. 2008, I shut the store down. 2008, my first kid's born. 2008, I go back to the bank to buy another property, and they tell me I don't qualify. And that's when I'm like, well, what do I do? Well, I'm qualified for nothing. I was in the infantry, right? So like there's not much that kind of parlays over into the civilian world. And so then I took a bunch of odd and end jobs, like literally Craigslist help wanted ads, and eventually ended up in like a 30-hour a week minimum wage job.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that to show like how cool it was from where you started there to like these crazy deals you're talking about now. And we'll dive in more into like the deals later in the next episode. But how can people reach you, or where do you want? You have 0 to 100 Tribe. We can talk about that next episode.
Yeah,
too,
0 to 100, 0 to 100tribe.com. You can find me, and then Instagram's probably the easiest way at the real Gabriel Hamel.
Cool. Well, Mike, you want to close us out?
No,
All right, I'll do it. Thanks, guys.
No.
Thanks for listening.
Read your tattoo.
Read my tattoo.
Yeah.
I love it.
Be who you is, not who you isn't. If you is who you isn't who you is.
Dude, I fucking love that. And it's from your dad. It's one of your dad's statements that
My
you
dad.
got like a year or so after we met. And it's funny. It's impactful to me because of the story that you told when you got it. But when I met you, started the journey of becoming someone and learning that there is someone to become, and then having the mindset of becoming someone. And it's an identity statement. That's why I love it.
100%. I mean, I want to be the most authentic version of myself.
Yeah.
Like that's something I want to instill in my kids. Like, you know, I want them, I don't care what they grow up and do. I want them obviously to be happy and prosperous, but more than anything, I want them to be authentic to themselves. And that's just something my dad used to say. I mean, it's just a different way of saying be yourself. You know, and through the years, I hope that I have become a more authentic version of myself as time goes on.
Hell yeah. Great, Andy.
Love it.
Thanks, man.
See you next time.
Absolutely.